following audio drama contains mature themes and content some listeners may find upsetting. Listener discretion is advised.
Vampire the Masquerade, Brides of Brighton. Episode 2, A Storm of Fire. Maeve Anderson strode out of the town hall and into an evening that pulsed with the noisy revelry of Brighton's nightlife. Her new fledgling and the Nosferatu were leaning against a blocky white pillar, talking softly to each other. "Evening, Maeve," Sabini inclined his head to Maeve as she ascended the smooth stone steps. "Shalom," Ellie said with a slight nod. "Are you Jewish?" the Nosferatu asked, cocking one ratty eyebrow. "Ashkenazi on my mum's side," Elvira explained. "Irish Catholic on my dad's." "Damn," Sabini laughed. "Someone up there really liked depressing your ancestors." Despite knowing Ellie for 3 years, May genuinely had no idea about her friend's heritage. It dawned on her that she'd never really thought to ask. Maeve Anderson herself was from mixed Scottish and Geordie stock. Anderson was a name that she'd adopted after her embrace. She'd been born Maeve McCallan. "My parents were Italian immigrants, in case anyone was wondering," the Nosferatu murmured, after a short silence had fallen over the group. "We can talk about our ancestry later," Maeve grunted. "The prince has a job for us." For reasons unknown to her, not knowing about Ellie's heritage had gotten under Maeve's skin. She was more than a little irritated, but she couldn't put her finger on what specifically was causing tepid anger to simmer inside of her. "What does Ludovisi need from our merry fellowship?" Sabini asked. "There's some journalist who's gotten hold of some pictures and started chasing a story that she shouldn't have," Maeve explained. "It's a potential masquerade violation if we don't stamp it out. Her name is Chelsea Galizia." A boisterous laugh exploded out of Ellie. "I know Chelsea. She lived in my halls during first year. Calling her a journalist is like calling someone a doctor because they know how to put on a plaster." Ellie chuckled. "She writes clickbait trash. The last piece of hers that ended up on my timeline was about what kinks she thought Toy Story characters would have." Maeve blinked dimly at her child in darkness. "I know what those words mean," she mumbled. "But not when you put them in that order." Elvira rolled her eyes. "My point is that her writing makes tabloid garbage look like the fucking Panama Papers," the fledgling told Maeve. "If she's gotten her hands on anything even vaguely important, it must be a complete fucking fluke." "The fact that you know this woman could be immensely useful," Sabini chimed in. "If we need to destroy whatever these incriminating pictures and tidbits are, it will be so much easier to get to them through Ellie." "I can set up a meeting right now," Elvira chirped, pulling out her mobile phone. Maeve looked on with subdued amusement as Ellie fought with her phone, grunting like an angry warthog, whilst her touchscreen began to spark and flicker erratically. The mobile cast crackling sputters of bright light back at its owner, painting her face a garish white. "You're either going to need to find yourself an Igor to handle your phone for you, or do away with electronics, my darling," Maeve snickered. "Our kind and technology don't mix." Ellie growled with frustration. "Vampires can't use phones." "La Sombra can't," May corrected her. "It's one of the weaknesses of our clan." "Oh, fucking fantastic!" Ellie threw her hands up in frustration. "Of course I get turned by the secret gang of Amish vampires." "Ludovisi already told me that Chelsea is meeting with some mysterious buyer in town, so we can intercept her there," Maeve explained. "We just need to head to Sticky Mike's." "Let's make tracks then," Sabini gave a simple nod of understanding to Maeve. "Are we just glossing over the fact that I can't use technology anymore?" Ellie grumbled. "I don't know if you guys realise how dependent modern society is on..." Maeve raised one hand in a sharp motion, silencing her childer. "Focus less on your bloody phone and more on the darkness within you," she told Elvira. That is where our power comes from. Not just the ability to manipulate shadow, but the ability to realise there is no greater weapon than the blackness that infests our hearts. Malice, rage, cunning, ruthlessness. These are the tools you'll learn to wield. I'd still like to be able to use my phone, Elvira mumbled. Shut up, Ellie, said Maeve. Club Revenge's rooftop bar was closed for the evening, affording Nerissa Cathcart the privacy that she needed for tonight's meeting. She took a seat on a metal stool painted in bright rainbow colours and stared out at the wine-dark sea, spotting the ever-so-faint tower-like wind turbines spinning on the black horizon. I'm still surprised we got those past the NIMBYs. Dix's voice cut through the night. We live in the age of disgruntled internet shuttings, wielding petitions like weapons. The Nosferatu Primogen popped into being, swiftly slipping out of Obfuscate. She pulled up a bright rainbow stool next to Nerissa and sat down beside her. Nyx's posture was crooked and hunched, reminding the Tremere Primogen of Quasimodo. Nerissa sat upright, her own posture honed to absolute perfection. In an attempt to blend in at the club, she had dressed in what the Tremere considered to be smart casual, namely a sharp blazer and billowing button-up shirt. Judging by the state of the half-naked cokeheads that were thrusting and gyrating all over each other in the ear-splitting club below, Nerissa was severely overdressed. I have what you asked for, Nerissa said, slinging her ostrich leather satchel off of one shoulder and handing its contents over to Nyx. A gnarled hand snatched up the weighty book, which boasted a sturdy hardback cover. Nyx flicked open the tome, devouring its pages with her beady, vermin-like eyes. This is genuine, the Nosferatu nodded slowly. You must have royally pissed off some Giovanni when you grabbed it. I don't envy the storm that's coming your way. It was a calculated risk. Nerissa gave her shoulders a faint shrug. And I believe it will be worth it. The Tremere reached over to a nearby table, gracefully scooping up the cut glass bottle and cup that rested there. In a series of elegant movements, Nerissa poured herself a glass of rich blood and took an eager, yet controlled sip of the exquisite carmine. You're still pining after Ludovici's throne, aren't you? Nyx tittered in her gravelly voice. Some things never change. Is that so wrong? Nerissa pressed firmly. Am I such a villain for wanting a better future for Brighton and the Camarilla? I'm sure your motives are entirely selfless, Nyx scoffed. We'd be a formidable force if we worked together. Nerissa took a delicate sip from her glass of blood, savouring the tang of melancholy that flowed within the dark red vitae. Why do you want my help, Primogen Cathcart? A monstrous grin pulled on Nyx's twisted lips. What do you need from me? You helped Ludovici overthrow Baron Douglas back in the early 2000s, Cathcart said slowly. All of the gentrification and flourishing industry. You are just as responsible for that as the prince is, Nyx. Brighton is thriving because of you. The city is no longer festering beneath the boot heel of the deluded anarch pretenders. We had help from your inside man, Nyx tittered in her gravelly voice. But I'd be lying if I said I wasn't pleased with my handiwork. Nerissa slid her glass of blood across the table, offering it to the Nosferatu. The sewer rat took a ravenous gulp from the cup, knocking back what remained of the carmine liquid. Yet Ludovici still has us in a chokehold, Cathcart continued. Her leadership will bring nothing but stagnation to Brighton. Just look at how she invites suburban monsters into the Camarilla. She isn't cut out to be prince. And you are? Nyx shot an inquisitive glance at the Tremere Primogen. Yes, Cathcart gave a nod of firm certainty as she spoke. and I can give you the one thing you desire more than anything else. A look of hatred dominated Nyx's hideous visage. And what would that be? She growled. Maeve Anderson's final death, Nerissa replied. I can give you vengeance against the vicious bitch who will forever remain untouchable so long as Grey Ludovisi sits on the throne. Maeve's car pulled up just down the street from Sticky Mike's. The pavement was bloated with an inflated mass of revel seekers, reduced to awkward stumbling by a concoction of drugs and booze. Brighton was about as diverse as it gets, and the crowd of merrymakers came in every size, shape, and colour imaginable. Is one of the entry requirements for being a student not knowing how to stay out of the fucking road? May grumbled as she, Sabine, and Ellie clambered out of the vintage Ford. Maeve's car was an antique model, decked out to look like one of New York's iconic yellow taxis. It was her pride and joy, and one of the few vestiges that still tied her to her mortal life. They're harmless, Sabine laughed, eyeing up a group of uni kids that were drunkenly roaming past. I'm just glad you didn't run anyone over. Sterling Sabine was employing an ability known as Mask of 1,000 Faces, which allowed him to don a sort of magical disguise so that he could hide his grotesquely warped appearance. The fake Sabine had warm amber skin, dark hair, and a strong jaw. Maeve suspected that the Nosferatu had adopted a facade somewhat akin to how he had looked prior to his embrace. How are we approaching the Chelsea problem then, gang? Elvira asked, tossing her long tress of purple hair back over one shoulder. Take her out back and break her fucking neck, Maeve replied. Make it look like she just tripped and fell. Ellie groaned loudly. She's a shitty journalist, but she doesn't deserve to die, May, the fledgling protested. Can't we just swipe the evidence and wipe her memories? No, Maeve lied. You know bloody well that you can, Anderson, Sabine piped up. Ellie can distract her, whilst I grab the phone, and then you can dominate her. Maeve Anderson clenched her fists with irritation. My plan is so much simpler, she growled. If we resort to killing every time a problem crosses our path, we're going to leave a pile of corpses scattered all over Brighton, Ellie objected. That isn't just cruel, it's a surefire way to get the streets swarming with cops. Ellie's right, Sabine agreed. The subtle approach is best. Maeve rolled her eyes. Aren't you two just getting along swimmingly? She snapped. The trio headed over to Sticky Mike's, passing a long stretch of graffiti-coated takeaways, lavish bars, and extravagant apartments. Behold Prince Grey's handiwork, Sabine mumbled. Just try to ignore the fact that Brighton has the biggest homeless population outside of London. You sound like an anarch, Sterling, Maeve grunted harshly. Watch out, Sabine, Ellie teased. Maeve's going to report you to the vampire police for insubordination. Oh, how foolish of me, Sabine chuckled. I meant to say that my head is filled exclusively with thoughts of kissing Great Ludovisi's polished arse. The triumvirate muscled their way inside Sticky Mike's, and were instantly hit with a wall of thunderous sound, rising up from the basement gig below. The upstairs bar was rammed with rowdy patrons, fighting to get the bartender's attention. That's Chelsea over there, Ellie whispered, nodding towards a woman with skin the colour of chestnuts, who sat by herself in a secluded corner of the bar. She wore a ripped denim jacket, faux leather trousers, and had her curly hair bound up in a bright red scarf. All right, kids, Maeve said to her companions. Time to work your magic. Cameron Livingston waited for the gang of shit-faced students to wobble their way past his dark blue Mini Cooper, before slipping free of his seatbelt and quietly stepping out into the street. He quickly yet stealthily popped open the boot of his car and began collecting his tools for the evening. The hunter slotted his ornate knife into the sheath that was fastened upon his waist and fished out his grandfather's time-worn Luger pistol, which he hid inside a secret pocket deep within the folds of his flowing RAF longcoat. Finally, Amron placed a pair of specially crafted glasses over his face, which boasted dark lenses. Even though it was nighttime, Livingston wore the black shades as a defensive measure against the mind-bending powers of blanks, which he knew often required direct eye contact to twist humans to their demonic whims. "Lord, watch over me," he murmured to himself, "and guard me against the minions of darkness." Suddenly, Amron felt something sharp press up against his back. "Give me your wallet, rich fuck!" a voice hissed in his ear. "Or I'll gut you like a fucking fish." With a snort of laughter, Amron realised that he was being cornered by a lowly mugger, not a blank. "I see the Lord has sent me a warm-up," he thought gleefully. In a rapid flash of motion, Livingston rammed his elbow into the attacker, hitting him straight in the gut. The shocked thug gasped and went crashing down onto the pavement, landing in a heap on the ground. Amron spun around and pressed one boot-clad foot over the front of his startled mugger, forcing his weight on top of them. The thief, who turned out to be a man with a scraggly beard, dressed in a grubby parka coat, raised his arms in defeat, his tiny knife clattering down onto the pavement. Please," the thug spluttered. Don't hurt me." Amron lifted his boot off of the man, fixing him with a cold glare from behind his glasses. "Get out of here before I break your jaw," Livingston commanded. The would-be mugger clambered up onto his feet and went scampering off into the darkness. "Lucky for you, I'm hunting bigger prey tonight," Amron chuckled. "Chels!" Elvira sat down opposite her former flatmate, donning a bright grin. "How the fuck are you? I feel like I haven't seen you in ages." Chelsea Galizia looked up from her smartphone and smiled awkwardly at the La Sombra. "Oh, hey Ellie," the aspiring reporter murmured. I didn't know you hung out here." It was immediately apparent to Elvira that Chelsea was far from excited about bumping into her old flatmate. They had never been particularly close during the first year, and neither of the young women had made any effort to stay in contact since. Fortunately for Ellie, her new abilities could cut through all of the needless charades and social subterfuge. Whilst Elvira worked her magic, Sabini was making use of his powers and steadily sneaking up on their target. Ellie leant forward, staring straight into the rich brown eyes of Chelsea Galizia. "Tell me why you're here," the La Sombra commanded, mesmerising the amber-skinned woman who sat across from her. "What information are you selling?" Chelsea's stare bulged into a doll-like gorg as she danced to Ellie's hypnotic inclinations. There was a tote bag slung over one of her lithe shoulders, which Elvira suspected contained the compromising photographs Sabini would be after. "Do you remember Catherine Samhain?" the Wiki reporter asked. "She was doing media studies while you were practicing law. Cathy was a pretty popular streamer for a while. Her Twitch handle was Kiara. She suddenly dropped off the face of the earth, and I thought I'd do some digging in case there was a story tucked away somewhere." "Not because you were all concerned for her well-being," Ellie thought, but she kept silent. "Anyway," Chelsea continued, "I found out that Cathy's still knocking about Brighton, but I found her hanging around with this really weird crew." "How do you mean?" Ellie asked. "I snapped a few pictures of her down at Revenge with some guys that I linked back to Reggie Warren," Chelsea explained. "I don't know what drugs they've got her on, but she's pale as death. I thought that a local celebrity falling in with Brighton's biggest gangster would make for a hell of a headline." Anyone who had so much as a toe in Brighton's underworld knew about Reggie Warren. Since the 90s, the Warren gang had swept through the seaside city, forcing out the Scottish and Turkish firms that used to control the streets. In the modern nights, almost all of Brighton's drug trade was firmly in the grip of Reggie Warren and his inner circle of gangsters. Ellie wasn't sure how any of this linked back to the secret world of vampires she'd only recently become a part of, but she knew that she had been sent to intercept Chelsea for a reason. Casting a glance over the wannabe reporter's shoulder, Ellie caught sight of Sabini wearing his human disguise. The Nosferatu flashed her a quick thumbs up before vanishing back into the throng of drunken patrons. Sabini must have swiped the photographs from her bag, Ellie realised. Now to make sure she forgets all about this. Elvira made a sharp gesture with one hand, signalling Maeve over. "Evening, Chelsea," her sire called out as she came striding over to the table. "Having a nice night? Who are you?" Chelsea regarded the new arrival with a mixture of confusion and concern. "Do I know you?" Maeve swiftly locked eyes with the aspiring reporter. "I'm gonna need you to forget all about Catherine Samhain, kid," De La Sombra commanded. "And the buyer who wants your photographs." A flash of bloody crimson swelled in Maeve Anderson's irises, before suddenly vanishing. Sheer bewilderment sailed over Chelsea's golden likeness. What were we talking about again?" she stammered, scrunching up her face, as if she was fighting desperately to remember what had been stolen from her. "Really nice to catch up with you, Chels," Ellie chirped, clambering up out of her seat. "Let's do this again sometime." Amron moved hastily towards Sticky Mike's, each footfall powered by righteous purpose. He weaved his way past the drunken gutter trash that seemed to surge out across Brighton as soon as night fell, and made a beeline for the bar's double doors. "I will hunt with the will of David doing battle against the Philistines," Amron told himself. "Just as Christ withstood Satan's temptations, so too shall I thwart the clutches of his minions." Just as Livingston was about to barge his way inside, the entrance to the bar swung open, and 3 figures came barreling out into the dark of the night. 2 of the triumvirate were strangers to him, but he recognized the hell-spawn Anderson almost immediately. Rage pumped through his body like blood, seizing control of his irrational mind and giving way to pure primal instinct. Any thoughts of stealth and trickery were consumed by a crimson cloud of impulse. "Demon!" Amron let out a furious roar, pulling out his grandfather's old Luger and aiming it at Maeve Anderson. The hunter heard a passerby scream, whilst he squeezed the trigger and a thunderous bang ripped through the night. Overcome with surprise, the demonic whore took Amron's shot straight in the gut, stumbling ever so slightly backwards. Streets lit with vulgar orange lampposts broke apart into a swarm of hysteria, like a beehive that had been struck by a stone. Livingston readied himself to fire again, but was interrupted when one of Anderson's companions, a tall and muscular man, smashed him across the jaw with one unnaturally powerful fist. Amron found himself falling to the ground, his head bashing painfully against the solid pavement, and his dark glasses falling from his face. Were it not for the blank blood that the hunter ripped from his prey, a punch of such terrible might would have undoubtedly killed Livingston. The world had exploded into a messy haze of noise and panic. After Amron fired the shot, nearby civilians had descended into a shrieking horde, scrabbling desperately to get away from the ensuing fight. A terrified stampede came crashing down upon the street, and Livingston lost sight of the unholy wretches that he had come to slay. The hunter was in the process of pulling himself back up onto his feet, when a purple-haired young woman with a Zoftig build appeared above him. Suddenly, his right arm was caught in her grasp, and he felt as though the bones beneath his skin were being crushed below a steel press. The pain Amron felt eclipsed description, and his own tortured screams filled his ears. "Leave us alone," the woman snarled, "or I will rain so much agony down upon you that this feels like a pleasant fucking memory." His arm broke with a brittle shriek, and Amron grasped feebly at the shattered bulge which protruded from beneath his flesh. Shame flooded through Livingston like a tsunami, and all he could do was howl and cry, whilst the 3 blanks vanished into the darkness. "Curse you!" he barked like a rabid hound. "This is far from over!" Jezebel met Constable William Sims in their usual rendezvous point, the private upstairs lounge of Club Gorgon. "Evening, Jez." The sleazy officer greeted her with his signature vulgar wink and grin. "How the hell is your fine ass doing?" Crowley took her seat across from Sims, nonchalantly crossing one leg over the other. Club Gorgon was a young person's hangout, and an expensive one at that. Nestled between a strip club and a jewellery store, Gorgon also doubled as a front for the drug trade, but wasn't the sort of seedy haunt where you could get a bag of cocaine for 50 quid. The club was exclusively for the rich after all, and the vices it peddled were cutting edge, with a price tag to match. "What have you got for me, Sims?" Jezebel asked the crooked cop, in a stern tone which made her irritability clear. The lounge they found themselves in was small but extravagantly furnished. A chic minibar sat in one corner of the room, plush chairs surrounded a cut-glass table, and an enormous metal door separated the VIP room from the rest of the club. This was a room designed for prosperous mobsters and elite socialites. Sure I can't interest you in a drink first? Sims prompted, making no attempt to hide how he was mentally undressing her. Sure I can't shove your head through a fucking wall first? Jezebel hissed back. William raised his hands defensively. Chill, he squawked. I was just being polite. Fucking hell, woman. Why did you call me here? Jezebel asked through gritted teeth. That flat you asked me to keep an eye on the seafront? Well, there's been movement down that way, the copper explained. The owner let herself in for the first time in 2 months. The Canaanite raised one eyebrow, a wave of excitement swelling up inside her gut. You're sure it's the woman whose photo I gave you? She pressed. Stone cold certain, the bank copper nodded. Perfect match. With a grunt of approval, Jezebel fished around in her jacket pocket for the bulky wad of cash she brought with her and slid it over to Sims. The constable grinned like a greedy child opening their Christmas presents. Enjoy the club, Sims. Curly got up to leave as she spoke. Bring me more tips like this, and there's a metric fuck ton of cash heading your way. William Sims beamed, avarice blazing in his eyes like the glow of a lamppost on a foggy evening. Keep making me happy, and I'll keep making you happy, hot stuff. He cackled. Ellie, Maeve and Sabini were spread out across a sparsely furnished lounge which overlooked the lively Brighton seafront. As Maeve had explained to them both, this was a sort of safe house which was one of many properties that she had dotted about the city, all under false names of course. Nosferatu had abandoned his human disguise and once again appeared to be a misshapen and grotesque caricature of a person. Good work tonight, gang. The elder La Sombra offered up a modest smile. Especially well done with that nutcase hunter. Who was he? Ellie asked her sire. Someone you've crossed paths with before? Yep, Maeve grunted. Some deluded Crizzo called Cameron Livingston. Back when I still rolled with the Sabat, him and his friends ambushed us one night and managed to serve our doctors the final death. We hit back hard and killed all of them except Livingston, who managed to get away. He's been under me ever since. Seemed like a really charming bloke, Sabini said dryly. Well done for fucking his arm up, Ellie. That will hopefully keep him off our backs for a while. Yeah, good job, my darling, Maeve agreed. I knew you wouldn't disappoint me. Elvira felt a soft rush of pride. She'd always been a sucker for praise. How do we reckon this Warren gang are linked to kindred society then? Sabini asked the room. The hunter obviously thought there was enough of a vampire presence in those pictures that it piqued his interest. The working theory in Elysium is that the Warren gang are puppets of the Anarchs, Ellie's sire explained. So we've essentially just spent our evening cleaning up a masquerade violation for those deadbeats. Trust the Anarchs to risk exposing all of us. Elvira had a brief notion of who the Anarchs were, but her knowledge was riddled with gaps. Those are the rebel vampires, aren't they? She asked. The punks and anarchists of the vampire world. That is the short version, yeah, Sabini nodded. Up until the early 2000s, Brighton was an anarch city, controlled by a baron called Neil Douglas. Ludovisi overthrew him and took Brighton for the Camarilla. There are still some anarchs floating about though. Now they follow a Tremere named Boltaire Walsh, who used to be one of Douglas's top lieutenants. Ellie nodded slowly, making a mental note of what she was being told. We can go over the specifics tomorrow night. Maeve gave her fingers a sharp crack as she spoke. I was thinking of going for a stroll along the seafront. Do you two want to join me? I'll come, Ellie smiled. Oh, I think I'll call it a night, Sabini told them both. You two have fun though. I'll catch you tomorrow, when the sun goes down. Maeve and Ellie made their way out of the apartment and down onto a stretch of smooth stone street, which overlooked the pebble-covered beach. Seagulls squawked and screamed, soaring across the lilac night sky and above the gentle sea which swirled out towards the horizon. It seems like we did a pretty good job. Ellie lightly punched her side shoulder, and we managed not to kill anybody. I'd call that a victory. I know I'm hard on you, Maeve sighed. And I know that I've sprung an awful lot on you over these past few nights. I'm sorry for the pain that I've caused you, Ellie. I really am. When you become kindred, it sucks away at your soul. You start to lose little bits of who you are. Once your humanity begins to trickle away, it's harder and harder to feel compassion, or kindness, or warmth. Ellie stared at Maeve, watching the surface of a blood-sucking predator melt away into that of a fragile, vulnerable girl. Her shoulders sagged, her stance drooped, and her cocksure grin had dwindled into a lonely frown. Ellie didn't see a vampire anymore. She saw her friend. If you'd offered me immortality, I probably would have said yes. Elvira laughed quietly. But to be turned without my permission, I felt violated. Maeve's gaze fell feebly to the ground, as though she were ashamed to look Ellie in the eye. I know. Her voice became a faint whisper. I've hurt people I loved before, but I guess I didn't learn from my mistakes. Moving hesitantly, Ellie rested one hand on Maeve's shoulder. Why did you choose me? She asked. Out of everybody you know, why did you pick me? Truthfully, Maeve shifted uncomfortably as she spoke. I made up my mind when you told me about... Jordan. A flood of rage came rushing through Ellie in a fierce tidal wave. She pulled her hand away, glaring at her sire. Seriously, she hissed. You're fucking sick, Maeve. What did you expect? The other vampire snapped back. It showcased your tenacity, your strength, and your ability to get things done. I'm paying you a compliment. Why are you acting like... Elvira snarled, flashing her fangs as if she were brandishing a sharpened knife. Fuck me for ever expecting you to have a shred of decency left inside that cold carcass. Ellie spat. You haven't just lost a bit of your humanity, Maeve. You've lost it all. You're just a bloodthirsty animal. The fledgling de Sombre turned on her heel and fled back inside the flat, leaving Maeve Anderson alone in the darkness. Any word from Mr. North? Nerissa Cathcart asked the Prince of Brighton. The two women were in an elegantly decorated suite, a stone's throw from the city centre. A genuine mahogany table sat between them, and both kindred sipped from glasses that were generously filled with dark blood. Cathcart's carmine drink carried the fiery kick of anger. Whoever the blood had been harvested from was unhappy with their lot in life, and carried a violent rage deep within the very matter of who they were. His cybersecurity lackeys have uncovered proof that the Warren gang are laundering money through a string of local clubs, Prince Ludovici explained. A few whispers in their ideas, and we can cut off a huge swath of the Anarch's funds. Outwardly, Cathcart smiled, while she mentally cursed the meddling Malkavian and his entire deranged clan. I'll reach out to my double agent, Nerissa told Ludovici. I'll see if they know anything more about Reggie Warren's activities. The Tremere wasn't sure if it was the influence of the blood she was drinking, but she could feel a blossom of hot rage growing within her chest. She took a moment to compose herself and forced the fury back down into her gut. I hear there's a particularly vicious cyclone heading this way, Ludovici murmured, partially to Nerissa and partially to herself. Storm Demeter, they're calling it. The Tremere nodded. That's global warming at work, I suppose. The prince grunted. Perhaps, she mused. Or perhaps we are seeing ripples from whatever mysterious happenings have been brewing in the Middle East. Nerissa raised one eyebrow. You think it could be supernatural in nature? she asked of Entry. Ludovici shrugged her shoulders. Maybe I'm seeing patterns where there aren't any, the prince conceded. But I've been unable to shake this sense of incoming catastrophe over recent years. Do the damage projections of Storm Demeter not seem extraordinary to you? Cathcart professed that the cyclone appeared unusually destructive, but she was certain Ludovici was falling victim to superstitious folly. Well, she was almost certain. Those who believe the final nights are upon us likely share such fears, Your Highness, Nerissa told Ludovici. There are certainly more thin bloods about than there used to be. The prince waved one hand dismissively. Forget I said anything, she muttered. Nerissa was a pragmatist, not some deluded quack chasing omens of doom. Nevertheless, she found herself unable to shake Ludovici's musings from her thoughts. This is not the dawn of Gehenna, she sharply scolded herself. Her own utilitarian ideals notwithstanding, Nerissa Cathcart couldn't brush aside the creeping feeling of dread that had begun to skitter down her spine. A short while after Ellie had retreated back into the flat, Maeve took a languid stroll down the Brighton seafront, listening to the placid lapping of waves against the stony shore. With a quiet smile resting on her lips, Maeve lit herself a cigarette and gazed out at the inky black horizon. Blinking lights and blocky buildings faded into a wilderness of oily city, which became one with the curtain-like vastness of the night sky. It ain't no sunrise, Maeve thought aloud, but it's still pretty damn gorgeous. Going for a walk, Maeve? A harsh voice cut through the darkness. You should know better than to let your guard down. Jezebel Crowley emerged from the shadows, clutching a clunky 12-gauge shotgun in both hands. Crowley wore a hefty leather jacket over a black undershirt, and had a sinister glare burning in her eyes. Hello, Katerina, Maeve sighed, taking a shallow pull from her menthol courgette. Don't fucking call me that, Jezebel barked, furiously thrusting her shotgun in Maeve's face. Disrespect me again, and I'll blow your fucking head off. Unfazed, the Sombra continued to puff away on her cigarette. How many times have we danced this dance, princess? Maeve rolled her eyes as she spoke. If you were gonna kill me, you'd have done it when I left the Sabbat. We both know you ain't gonna shoot me. You don't know shit about me, Jezebel growled. You don't know how much I've changed since you abandoned me. Maeve let out a spiritless laugh. Still sore about that, are we, princess? She asked. For what it's worth, I'm sorry you got hurt. I didn't mean for you to get trapped in the fallout. A slight flicker of uncertainty flashed through Jezebel's gaze. I'm not letting you talk your way out of this, the Cainite hissed. I've given you far too many fucking chances. Maeve took another drag from her cigarette. Listen, Katerina. The Sombra barely had time to process what was happening when a plume of crackling flame exploded through the night. Ravenous fire swallowed Maeve up, suffocating her inside a cocoon of excruciating agony. In that moment, she realized she had finally pushed Jezebel too far. In that moment, she realized Jezebel's shotgun was filled with dragon's breath rounds. Spears of boiling orange and scorching red tore through her, turning necrotic flesh into charred ash. Pain exploded in every cell of her body, yet she found her head filling with frantic thoughts of Elvira. Oh, Maeve managed to whisper, as she was devoured by blazing flame. As darkness descended for the final time, Maeve Anderson's own life ended in a storm of fire. Brides of Brighton is a Vampire the Masquerade fan project written and performed by Melody Hill Fisher. The World of Darkness setting is the property of Paradox Interactive. An enormous thank you to Kit Palmer for providing us with his original music.